Welcome back to the final video in this mini-series on how marketers can prepare for those user identity challenges. In this particular video, we're going to be looking at what marketers should do specifically and how they can bring together their action plan to actually get started on addressing some of these challenges. So to kick us off this time round, a question for you, Wayne. So what's the first thing that advertisers should be doing to address privacy in marketing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think having a plan is super important right now. There's a lot going on. And in the white paper, we talk about a 4-stage process for advertisers. And the first part of that process is education. So really, it's just understanding the changes that are happening with user identification driven through privacy. As we mentioned about, from a browser perspective, that's constantly evolving. There are updates to what Apple are doing and what Chrome in particular through Sandbox are doing regularly. So staying sort of abreast of those changes. Legislation obviously is European wide. GDPR is the most well-known initiative, but there are many others in other markets as well. So staying on top of those is important. And kind of the way you do that is just through meeting relevant companies, reading the open source documentation where you can, and leaning into industry initiatives, because the industry bodies are being very proactive in this space to make sure their members are aware of all these changes. So staying abreast of all these changes is important. But beyond that, it's then thinking, okay, so what will be the potential impact for what we do today? For example, if you're a heavily reliant on retargeting for campaign success, what's going to happen and when with these changes? Maybe if you are a reach and frequency advertiser and frequency capping is changing, what does that mean? Maybe you've gone away and built an incremental measurement model. All of a sudden, the ability to track users persistently is really changing. So, all these things that you might have been working on are changing. So understanding the impact to those, thinking about that from a strategic perspective. So how does that enable your marketing ambitions, but also from a cost perspective? So what does it mean commercially? Because marketing budgets are having to return harder than ever with coming out of a pandemic. So ultimately, there's as you would have seen in the previous 2 videos, a lot going on, but qualifying the impact of that through educating yourself and stakeholders in the business on it. But I guess the key thing is, don't panic. So when you're going on this education journey, it's very easy to be overwhelmed because there is a ton of information. But marketing has always been adaptive from moving from print to TV to digital, etc. But I think if you start to better understand the space, the impact it will have, start a scenario plan, doing that now rather than later will definitely put you in better shape.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I think the scenario planning is going to be very, very different depending on the advertiser, as we've alluded to it in previous videos. So if you are an e-com advertiser or a telecoms company, you're going to have access to a huge amount of user data and lots of different data relationships. Whereas there's going to be some reach and frequency advertisers that may not have as much direct data relationships with consumers, but do have data relationships across the ecosystem. So what are some of those scenarios that should be planned for? And what are some of the questions that they should be asking themselves? I'll pass that over to you, Phil.
Yeah, no, look, it's a good question, and we definitely referenced it in the previous video. I think there's going to be some brands out in the market today that are in a really good position as we move into this new world. They're in a good position because they have a ton of first-party data, right? So if you look at e-com, the likes of Asda's and the Tesco's. If you look at something like the telcos, you have the BTs and even the Skies as well of this world travel. You've got the Sky scanners that have a huge amount of intent data as well. These types of, I think if you're one of these types of brands, you're in a really good position, as I said, and you should consider moving into this world in building your own, I guess in inverted commas, retail media proposition, which we noted, or building your own private garden, which is fundamentally really using your own first-party data assets, being able to package these up and sell them in the form of campaigns to partner brands. So for a retailer, a partner brand could be a P&G, for example, within your own inventory or outside of your own inventory. This, of course, provides you with a springboard, I think, to offer more transparency to your partner brands around reporting and attribution, which is becoming more and more important, I think. And then, of course, Lloyd, you're right. There's a lot of brands out there that don't have a lot of first-party data, and that might be for the reason that they're just generally smaller businesses, or they don't have a direct line of sight of the consumer as well. So I guess if you're a smaller e-commerce brand, one of the ways that you could approach it as well is trying to engage in these, or I guess using your seed audience and partnering with these publishers on these second-party data deal, I guess alliances in inverted commas, to enable use cases such as lookalike modeling to acquire new audiences and first-party data. There's a really good example of that. We work with Channel 4, where they're fundamentally actually providing that solution, where they enable brands to upload their first-party data, query it versus their 24 million logged users, either target, I guess, audiences which are more appropriate to them within Channel 4, or carry out lookalike modeling. And then if you're an FMCG, in a lot of cases, they don't have a lot of first-party data. So again, it's a second-party data deal, but it has a little bit of nuance to it in the way that they can partner with publishers or big media owners. In that relationship, they can acquire first-party data. So the publisher will give them, say, for example, email information about consumers. And in return, if you're in this position and you're a big reach and frequency advertiser that has a lot of advertising spend, you can start to, in that relationship, start to make promises around spending more money with those chosen publishers as well. So it's a nice back and forth relationship that you can have with these types of publishers, and that would work quite nicely for something like I guess an RB or a Nestle or a P&G.
Yeah, makes sense. And so obviously there's a big gap there. So we've understood that education is the first step. Then really trying to understand those data relationships and that data that's available at the moment, and that obviously that varies differently per advertiser. I think next is then looking at solutions then, right? So I guess question for you, Wayne, looking at the two broad sets that we've defined here, those with lots of first-party data that they're looking to activate and manage better, and those that may not have as much first-party data but want to start facilitating some relationships with the rest of the ecosystem. How can technology help facilitate that?
Yeah, I mean, the tech's the enabler, right? So they're absolutely essential in the entire process. I think, from a brand perspective, they need to be working with advertiser stakeholders on what they're doing with their technology. So the development teams at these tech providers, they're sort of the first ones who are speaking to, these data partners, how to enable, onboard them, looking at how to adapt around the sandbox changes or the app transparency stuff that Apple are doing. So the tech companies really are the ones which, companies, advertisers and publishers are very reliant on to kind of make this stuff happen. They also, as well, these tech companies, they need to be compliant themselves. They need to know what the rules of engagement are for them and how do they comply with the particular regulation, and how does that impact brands. So really, they are the closest source to the data truth on both the buy side and sell side, and they can see the impact firsthand of what it means to their, the scale of their data, kind of the velocity, veracity of it. So passing that back into brands and publishers is absolutely critical.
So
I was going to make a point there as well. I mean, there's, to your point, Wayne, there's lots of tech providers out there as well, right? So we've talked about some of the solutions across universal IDs. You've got clean rooms as well. So there's lots of tech providers out there in the market. So, and then there's also businesses that bring all of those solutions together in one place. So I guess what you would term end-to-end solutions. So I guess for an advertiser point of view, it's about understanding, where these tech providers can fit within your broad needs or requirements and the use cases that you require, and then making a decision about which one's the best for you moving forward.
Yeah, and how would you say is the best way to go about making a really informed decision on what provider to go with? Because there's so many different options.
Yeah, I mean, I think I actually did a video about this the other day as well, about all of the acronyms in the space. I think fundamentally it's understanding what those use cases are as kind of point one, and how they align with your requirements as a business at a very top level. is really, really key, because some of these vendors, they won't be able to deliver. They may be able to deliver 80% of your use cases, but the remaining 20% might be really important to you as a brand as well. So, and that really comes down to as well, I think throughout the process is having in-depth consultations with these tech providers to understand not just what they're marketing, but also what are their functional requirements as well. So not just involving marketing and commercial people in the conversation, and of course salespeople like me, but then also technical people as well. So for a lot of these solutions, it doesn't just straddle or doesn't just fall within one team. It definitely straddles across multiple. So I think that's really key. I think for brands that have been burnt by some tech in the past, maybe that has been the case in terms of how they've gone about buying tech. Because it's hard, right? I mean, if you look at the ecosystem at the moment, MarTech, I mean, what's 7,000 or 8,000 MarTech businesses across the ecosystem. So those types of things, advertisers can embark on. The other is RFP processes, which they can carry out as well, of course. But just bear in mind, RFP processes are expensive. They require a lot of time from you as from an advertiser point of view, and actually running those processes. So it's fundamentally those kind of 3 points, and then also understanding what's the best for you as well.
Yeah, it makes sense. So correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like the immediate next steps are to sort of build that action plan, educate the business on what's happening, really understand what those data relationships look like today and how much data is available, build those requirements, and then essentially assess where you can fill those gaps within your technology stack.
Yeah.
Excellent. So Phil, what should they be doing next?
So yeah, no, look, thanks everybody for the time and listening to our videos. We'd implore you to download the white paper to find out more information from the programmatic advisory, which it's hosted now. And please do get in touch with either Wayne or myself if you'd like to discuss further.